What if I told you that Aston Martin's problem in Bahrain was not simply a lack of rhythm, but that they were losing up to 160 horsepower and more than 4 seconds per lap without being able to do anything to solve it? Because that is exactly what happened in the second week of testing in Bahrain 2026. While some teams accumulated more than 400 laps understanding their cars, the AMR26 was barely surviving on the track. Failures in the Honda power unit, critical battery problems, vibrations that affected the chassis structure, and a car that, according to internal words, was between 4 and 4.5 seconds per lap behind the leaders. Lance Stroll did not hide his surprise when he understood the real dimension of the problem. It wasn't a bad setup. It was not a question of adaptation. It was something much deeper. And the most worrying thing is that all this occurs in the most important year of the new hybrid regulation 2026, where every kilometer lost means starting the championship with an almost irreversible disadvantage. The second week of testing in Bahrain 2026 should be the moment where Aston Martin began to confirm that its project for the new regulations was on the right track. After months of development, integration with Honda, and adaptation to a regulation that practically divides power 50% between combustion and hybrid, the AMR26 had to start showing its true face. But what happened in those days was not a simple lack of usual preseason rhythm. It was confirmation that something structural was not working. From the beginning of that second round of tests, the mileage was already a warning sign. While the rivals accumulated more than 400 laps, Aston Martin barely reached figures that ranged between 128 and 206 total laps. In a normal year that would be worrying, but in 2026 it is directly critical. The new regulation requires a detailed understanding of energy management, the deployment of the hybrid system, and thermal efficiency. Each lap is pure gold for correlating data from the wind tunnel, simulator, and real track. And Aston Martin simply wasn't rolling enough to understand its own car. The first symptoms manifested themselves in the form of premature stops. The Honda power unit began to show reliability problems that not only affected continuity on the track, but pure performance. Internally, there was talk of a rating close to 160 horses, a brutal figure in a Formula One where 10 separate positions. This cut was not voluntary by strategy. It was a necessary measure to avoid further damage due to thermal and vibration problems. The cooling system was suffering from episodes of severe overheating, and excessive vibrations were beginning to compromise even the chassis mounts. Added to this was a key problem: the battery and the integration of the MGUK. Under the new regulations, the electrical part has an enormous role. It is not an add-on, it is the heart of performance in acceleration and efficiency. Without stable energy management, the car loses not only power on the straight, but also consistency when exiting corners. And that was exactly what began to be perceived in Fernando Alonso's stints during that second week. It wasn't simply lack of grip or imperfect balance. The car did not deliver power in a stable manner, which directly affected the pace on long runs. The final blow came on the last day. Lance Stroll could barely complete 6 laps. Alonso, in the midst of attempting a long simulation, had to stop on lap 26. Without complete long runs, without consistent evidence of degradation, and without real comparisons of energy consumption, the team ended the week practically in the dark in terms of key data. And the most serious thing was not only the time lost on the track, but the knowledge they could not acquire. When the chronometric references were finally analyzed, the magnitude of the problem was exposed. Alonso's best time was 1 minute and 35.974 seconds, a difference of more than 4 seconds from the leaders. Internally, there was talk of being between 4 and 4.5 seconds per lap behind. For a team that aspired to consolidate itself in the upper zone with the new technical cycle, that gap is not circumstantial, it is structural. And this is where Lance Stroll's reaction comes in. What initially seemed like a combination of pending adjustments or adaptation to the regulations ended up being revealed as something much deeper. Stroll himself publicly admitted that the car was a long way off and that the improvement would not be immediate. There was no magic solution. It wasn't a matter of changing the rear wing or adjusting heights. The problem was at the base of the project: engine integration, thermal management, and general balance of the concept. The 2026 regulations radically changed the technical hierarchy of Formula One. The balance between the 475 horsepower of the combustion engine and the 475 horsepower of the hybrid system makes energy management the most determining factor in performance. It is no longer enough to have good aerodynamics or a balanced chassis. If the integration between ICE, battery, and MGUK is not perfect, the car loses acceleration, loses efficiency on straight lines, and loses stability in power delivery. And that is exactly what the AMR26 began to show. Without sufficient mileage in the second week, Aston Martin was unable to correctly map the energy deployment. They were unable to simulate real racing scenarios with different recovery and electrical delivery modes. They were unable to verify how the temperatures in the Bahrain desert affected the hybrid system under prolonged loading. And most worrying, they couldn't correlate what the simulator was saying with what the track was showing. In an era where correlation is the cornerstone of development, that disconnect is a direct threat to future performance. Furthermore, having to apply derating to the engine to prevent further damage implies that the equipment was not yet operating in its optimal power window. That means they don't even know the true potential of the entire package. When you have to limit performance for the car to survive, you're not developing, you're containing damage. And every day you spend holding back instead of optimizing, rivals advance. For Fernando Alonso, this has a direct consequence. He cannot correctly evaluate the real balance of the car. If power is not delivered stably, the rider adapts his driving to protect the system. That distorts the technical feedback. What appears to be understeer may simply be a lack of electrical deployment on corner exit. What appears to be an aerodynamic deficit may be a consequence of not having sufficient top speed due to energy problems. It is a domino effect where the origin is in the hybrid heart of the car. And this is where Lance Stroll was truly surprised. Because when the data is analyzed and you discover that the delay is not only aerodynamic nor only mechanical, but systemic, you understand that the recovery will not be immediate. It's not about bringing a minor update in the first race. It involves reviewing integration, cooling, structural vibrations, and energy management together. That takes time. And in Formula One, time is the only thing you don't have. The biggest impact can be seen at the beginning of the season. If Aston Martin arrives at the first races without having completed enough long test runs, they will be learning in real Grand Prix conditions what others already understood in preseason. That means reactive weekends, not proactive. It means running after the problem instead of anticipating it. And in a championship where early development sets the trend for the entire year, starting like this can mortgage a large part of the season. The big question now is not whether Aston Martin had a bad second week in Bahrain. The real question is how much structural damage that start can cause in a season marked by a regulatory change as radical as that of 2026. Because when you start a new technical cycle with doubts in the power unit, thermal problems, unstable hybrid integration, and lack of mileage, you are not simply behind. You are building on a foundation that you do not yet know if it is solid. The immediate impact will be visible in the first races. Aston Martin will arrive with less simulated race data than its direct rivals. That means uncertainty in energy strategies, doubts about tire degradation, and an incomplete understanding of car behavior with different fuel loads. In practical terms, this translates into weekends where the team will be testing in full competition what others have already validated in tests. And that situation is extremely dangerous in such a tight grid. But the problem goes beyond the startup. When a power unit needs derating to prevent damage, the priority is not performance, it is reliability. And while work is being done to solve overheating, structural vibrations, and battery management, aerodynamic development is conditioned. Because you can't optimize loading or reduce drag if you don't know how much extra heat the hybrid system will generate or if vibrations will compromise the chassis again. Everything is connected. Fernando Alonso did not show his true level because the car was not in a condition to do so. His deficit in time was not a question of adaptation or setup. It was the direct consequence of a car that operated limited, that could not deploy its full power, and that did not even accumulate enough mileage to understand its own behavior. In a regulation where energy management is the heart of performance, losing laps in testing is equivalent to starting the championship with a blindfold on. Lance Stroll, upon knowing the real magnitude of the delay between 4 and 4.5 seconds per lap, understood that the situation is structural. This is not a simple aerodynamic update that will arrive in the first race. It is about solving deep problems of integration, reliability, and general concept. And that requires time, technical coordination, and an immediate reaction from Honda and the engineering department. The most worrying thing is not only the difference in stopwatch, but the lack of data and correlation left by that second week. In a new regulatory era, the team that learns the fastest gains an exponential advantage. Aston Martin, on the other hand, left Bahrain with open doubts and with a still unstable base. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.